What's the ROI of design?
Jeez.
Let me preface. Let me tell you why I'm asking you that. So we've talked to a lot of people, and obviously a lot of the architects that we have come in, and other developers, and it's a real interesting question because we get a lot of different answers. But what we were talking about this earlier. What we've experienced with you is the design of what you're doing seems very, very, very important. I don't know if that's the first and foremost when you look at a deal, but it's definitely kind of a signature of what we're seeing that you do. And what is that for you?
I mean, I think it's it just appeals to me personally. I like good design, and I think that I respond better to good design, and my hope is that our tenants do as well. Our tenants, guests, patrons do. But I also think that we have so much development happening in Houston, and land, no limitations on land, no limitations on growth. There's no anti-growth sentiment. There's a growing population, and there's no zoning, no other barriers to speak of. Generally speaking, probably over 90% of the city that's fair, or the region that's fair. So it's really easy to develop, and there's so much demand for more retail, more restaurants, more shopping. It's not really that necessary to get, and most of my colleagues, a lot of the people in our industry don't pay that much attention to design. I have somebody we deal with whose perspective is it doesn't add dollars to the bottom line. There's no sense in doing it. I kind of think it does add dollars to the bottom line, but it's not direct dollars. I think to a certain extent there is some direct dollars. You may get a little bit more rent, but I think that the indirect dollars are that your tenants do better. So to the extent that you have percentage rent in a shopping center, you participate. But even notwithstanding a chance of percentage rent, you still benefit because your tenants do well. And when your tenants do well, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to succeed and that they're going to renew. And costs of refitting, re-tenanting a space are significant. It's probably 4 months of downtime conservatively, plus leasing commissions, plus tenant build-out dollars. Yeah. So I think that's the quantifiable answer to your question. But
do you find that the quality of tenant is different? I think based on the level of
it depends on some projects. I mean, as I said, there's so much just demand in Houston, and the consumers' expectations are have heretofore not been that high. Mm-hmm. I think what's happening though, the other place that the return on investment for design comes in, is that everything today can be bought cheaper, more easily on the internet, and get to your house just as quickly, practically, and have a broader selection, et cetera. So brick and mortar retailers are in a fight to survive. And the only way that they can survive is, you can't get, it's not cheap. It's not going to be cheaper to buy from them. It's not going to be necessarily faster to buy it. Well, I guess it is, but it's not less convenient to buy it from them. So you really have to make the experience noteworthy. Mm-hmm. And people, even if they don't realize why they like a space, the interior of a restaurant or a patio, but they do like it, then they're going to want to go back. And of course, certain things, like I just talked about restaurants and patios, and certain things like restaurants, bars, personal services, it cannot be done online. I mean, it's hard to get your nails done on the internet. So I think that on further reflection, there is a strong return in both ways.
Whenever you start thinking about, we talked about a little bit about this last night when we were talking about programming, but do you have a sensibility or some sort of formulaic pathway as it relates to how do you set up the experiential flow? Like, are there must-haves that you think about first, whether it's a number of parking spaces or a number of small amenity plugins to?
I mean, I think I think you have to find something that speaks to the consumer you're trying to attract. And it has to have an authenticity to it. It can't feel pandering, and it can't feel cliche. Like, there are so many Instagram moments that middle-aged white guys plan for the front of their shopping centers, which may or may not resonate with the targeted consumer. And I'm not, and so I just think that the basics that make spaces feel good is landscaping, authentic materials, and scale and proportion. And so I don't know how those relate specifically to what we're making it experiential individually, but I think collectively they all are accretive.
Yeah. But what I've heard you talk about context, and a lot of what you just said is about being appropriate to the context.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like our East Downtown stuff is we don't want to do glassy, chromy, real slick looking stuff. We talked about the post HTX, the Rem Koolhaas project, Frank Lou Lovett project designed by Rem Koolhaas, and that's a extraordinary project. It's a really cool project, and it's grand. The scale of it is huge, and it has right now there's a huge food hall in there, and it really works well. But that's a completely different scale of what we're doing.
Yeah.
What does authenticity mean when you're thinking about? We definitely want to talk more about your East Downtown project, but what does that mean right now?
It means a lot. I mean, there's a lot of definitions. It's authentic materials, proportions, and I think it's just contextually something that resonates with your tenants' targeted customers. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to do that without really coming across as cliche or pandering, even worse.
But does it mean different things in different areas, like East Downtown, River Oaks?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, yesterday I drove you through River Oaks District. That's all glossy chrome, big bright windows, and that doesn't resonate with the sort of adaptive reuse stuff. At the same time, there are some things that are consistent. I think that intuitively people have a sense of what makes a place. They can't verbalize what makes a space feel good, but I think that when they're in that space, they know they're in a space that feels good. And it may be proportions, it may be lush landscaping. I think that stuff is universal. And you look into what's a cozy couch? The cozy couch means the same thing to most people, because there's certain things that are universal. It's a bit grand, but rather consistent, I'd say.
Where Jeremy and I were talking, I'm real curious about you and your history, your curious mind prior to development. How did you develop your curiosity, and then how did you develop your passion for architecture, art, that then led into maybe development? I don't know if that's as linear as that, but is that just your nature as a kid growing up?
Yeah, I was always interested in design, and my mother was a ASID designer, but my mother died when I was very young. But I just was always interested in design, and our house had some nice iconic pieces, I suppose. And some really crazy 1970s, big puffy, like orangey brown leather couches.
Nice.
And I just always liked it. I had a relative who, I thought, oh, maybe architecture would be a fun path. And then I realized that I had a relative who was developing properties all over the world. And I realized that, he was telling the architects what to do. And he became the patron of the architects. And that just seemed like a really appealing thing. Yeah. You're traveling around the world, you're building things, it's very tangible. And you're, if you so choose, you're working arm in arm with the architect. So I thought that was a more interesting role to be in.
Was that, had you thought about the career of an architect and then you pivoted, or was that just something that you learned early? You're like,
well, both.
Because that's your curious mind working. And
I mean, I read a lot. I read get a lot of blogs on a lot of different topics, and I'm just interested in stuff. And I think that, I'm interested in art and architecture, and I don't think I ever really thought necessarily about, I wasn't far enough down the path to be able to honestly tell you that I pivoted from architecture to development. I mean, I went, where I went to college, it was like you went in as an architect, and I just knew I wasn't going to do that. I already figured that out. And so I figured that out I guess probably in 10th or 11th grade. Anyway, so that's what,
that's interesting. I growing up from Waxahachie, I had no idea what architecture was. And I had talked to a couple of individuals, and they were pretty sour on the trade, but I always think, man, maybe that was just my stubborn mind, because when I entered into school, my first studio was a disaster, and I had no idea what I was doing. And even the studio professor, which he was a little bit of a dick, told me, "You're never going to get anywhere. Nothing's going to happen. You should quit." I was like, "I'll show you." Yeah. And I probably didn't do that well in that class, but I kept at it and kept at it and kept at it, because perhaps I'm a stubborn individual, and I did really enjoy it, the problem solving. But
you were attracted more to the problem solving than the aesthetic part of it, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both, because I didn't truly understand what architecture was. I didn't really understand what that was until during my master's. That's after I had graduated from undergrad, worked for 6 years more or less, and then knew that I just wasn't happy professionally. And then I went back and got a master's in Southern California, like in a small theoretical school, and then it clicked. And so I didn't quite understand what aesthetics was. I really appreciated the problem solving in terms of making space and the volume appropriate. But I didn't know how to quite put the pieces together to make it attractive. And when I really started heavily diving into theory and understanding how the different social and psychological mechanisms that you could pull, then that started getting to be a lot of fun. And all the theory-based approaches were a lot of fun, because then it gave it reason in terms of how the psyche, starts to understand the evolution of architecture. But at the same time, I was never fully introduced to the profession as a business, or how architects work. How does the business happen? And what does development mean? Like all the little nuances outside of, making these buildings was never really introduced.
Is that a shortcoming of
I
think a lot of architectural schools forsake or don't do that. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of my new life goals is to rectify that. And I think the architecture as an education is completely broken because they don't fully explain the reality of the process, the business. They they promote creative thinking and problem solving, but they leave the whole 3/4 of the profession alone, and they don't really properly educate. And then we always get on my soapbox too about the business of architecture. I think is broken as well, in our profession, and how we contract, how we negotiate, how we.
Oh, you mean the whole structure?
The whole structure.
Oh, industry. Yeah. Interesting.
And then how we perform work as an industry. It's segmented so that it creates this linear process where it shouldn't be linear. It should be sitting at the round collaborative and problem solving as a group. And you'd be amazed at, we almost write our contracts these days to where we want to know who that GC is. We want to sit at the table with them day one. We want to understand. So we work backwards in a way of schedule, budget, contractor. And then we sit down and we start talking about design. So then we're not having any surprises at the very end. And it's difficult to do in some arenas.
Yeah, it depends. I think it depends a lot on who your client is and what your client's objective is.
Yeah, absolutely.
First and foremost, I suppose.
Well, you would tend to believe, though, every client's objective is budget and schedule, right? If you take design out of it, which is subjective in some cases, every project needs to have a budget and a schedule, and if that's what we try to get right on the upfront. Mm-hmm. But it's not that way because they want to bid it out 20 different times and try to get the best deal. But our argument is we're probably getting the best deal if we can really hire appropriately and get the right team at the table and then move collectively as one.
I think the biggest obstacle to that is a trust factor, right? It's you as the client developer would have to trust the team that's in play. I mean, it's one thing to trust an architect, but then to bring the contractor in that early and almost make some type of a commitment to that person that early, it takes a litlittle bit of trust. And because, the traditional model, like you said, is you get to a certain point and then you bid it out to several contractors, which I can understand that, being on the other side, being on the owner side, I can completely understand why that's important, valuable to do that. So you're making sure that you're getting the best competitive deal, but I think it depends on the project. Depends on the client.
I think it depends on the project because a lot of projects have a. I think it depends on the project and the intent of the owner, the developer. Because if you're going to build a Chick-fil-A or a 7 Brew or something like that, where it's just cranking it out, and it's the program. The project is basically it's efficient as it's going to get. The plans are the only thing you're doing is basically site work or site programming.
That's true.
And then at the same time, if you look at real estate on a spectrum with residential at one end, if you're closer to this end of that spectrum at the bulk warehousing, there's some undoubtedly efficiencies you do, but it's really more about clear heights, proximity to rails, that kind of stuff. And
yeah, you're right. Yeah, I guess I was thinking more of the projects that we work on are very contextual and relating to some of the things that you said are conditions that you look towards in your developments. But yeah, you're right. There are some projects that are just teed up and they are what they are.
Yeah, I mean,
you could price those out several different ways.
And nobody really cares about, in those projects, for better or for worse, the design part of it, which is really basically superficial, some materials or some massaging of the finishes. that's really about what you're doing, because everything else, and that's less significant than getting it on the ground and making sure that it meets the other more quantifiable things. Mm-hmm. But in terms of context, you reminded me, like, not to try to go architect on you, but like Daniel Libeskind who had never built anything, I think, before the Jewish Museum in Berlin, I think. Yeah. And he's been an architect. He was like 50 years old or so. And he had never done anything other than theory. Yeah. And my gosh, that's incredibly contextual. And it's all about the experience and how you are supposed to feel consciously and subconsciously just walking through that museum.
Did you go to that one? Yeah. That, I will say, I was studying in Florence I did a semester abroad, and I went to that museum, and that was one moment where the power of emotion, like art, that got me. And I didn't know what I was walking into, but that changed a lot for me in that moment.
Is that one room where you look up and you see a hole in the ceiling?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was such a powerful building. I don't know about, some of his most recent stuff, but that building was one of those.
Well, the World Trade Center memorial is his as well, but I don't know what other stuff he's done since then. Yeah. I think context has a place depending on the type of, or contextualization, I should say, has a place depending on the type of project it is. And there are parts, but similarly, there are also projects for which there's really not that much relevance of contextualization.
Do you start with that when you're looking at a potential project? Do you start with like what it could be from a design standpoint, from an engagement standpoint with the environment, more so than like is that a commercially viable deal that the economics are going to pencil out? Is it like, man, this could be something really cool? Because we talk a lot about doing cool stuff. Or is it? Do you lead with that? Is it kind of at the same time?
No, I mean, honestly, you have to lead with whether it's a viable. I think if you see a really cool old building that's in an area there's nothing happening in that area, I don't necessarily want to be the total pioneer, because you're taking huge bets and with my money and investors' money, and that's just not something that it's prudent to do. So I think the first thing you have to do is see if it's a viable deal, and then I don't think that there's like a line where the quantitative viability analysis stops and the design part starts. I think it happens. There's a lot of overlap between where the initial quantitative analysis ends. If you're getting to the point where that at least for me anyways, I'm thinking a little bit, that would be cool if you did this, or you could do this, or there's a demand for this kind of product here or something. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's easy. I don't know if everybody thinks linear, or people think I've got a lot of thoughts going on at the same time, but I'm probably more in the latter.
But I would imagine, I think that as we get older and we have more experience and hopefully wiser, there are things that we process much quicker at the same time, and you could. I'm assuming you could think about revenue. You could think about the benefits structurally or profitability of a project while thinking about the avenues or the success of a design. But did you have that ability when you were younger, just starting out, or did you try to compile the pieces in a linear fashion?
I don't remember since it was 1,000 years ago.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I get what you mean. I think that if you like design, and that's important to a person, I think you're always sort of aware of it, whether consciously or more often subconsciously. So I think it's always sort of there, even when you're just looking at a wall, you notice proportions of the wall. So perhaps there's some of that, but I don't know necessarily if it's as distinct, where, as I said, that one act stops and the other begins. I think there's a lot of overlap, which is, as you said, as you get older, you notice that stuff, or it becomes more subconscious, I suppose, or intuitive, perhaps.
If you're staying authentic with like the East Downtown project, do you not have to worry as much about those Instagram moments and stuff like that? Because I agree. I think that's getting to the point where, man, it's way overplayed. Like it's a little cliche. It's very cliche, But are you still thinking about like what could be cool 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or is it strictly like these are industrial buildings? I've got this demographic around it. I'm gonna provide something that they're currently going to appreciate and attracted to and make sense for them, or it's like
no. I think that like there will be Instagram moments for the foreseeable future, and I think that they sort of evolve. And what was cool 4 years ago, or even 18 months ago, and the time is compressed in this world we live in now, is no longer cool today. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to presuppose or suggest that I have the insight on social trends and what's going to be cool in 24 months or in 36 months or in 7 years. So I think you have to design integrity, and I think design integrity transcends fads. And I don't know, and I'm not saying that Instagram moments are fads, but I think that what constitutes an Instagram moment, a photo-worthy Instagram moment today might not be what it is in 4 years or in 14 months, and then it just looks sad. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Kind of switching gears, if you don't mind. How did your experience dealing with REO, bank-owned stuff early on? How does that affect you or inform how you think about deals?
Because I did that when I worked for a savings and loan, clean up after the S&L crisis.
What did you take away from that might be valuable?
There's just a lot of, not that much. I would say just it really helped me hone my analytical skills and just quantitative analysis, which we did some pretty. We weren't doing that kind of comprehensive modeling back then. We were using VisiCalc, I guess, and SuperCalc, which preceded Lotus 123, which preceded Excel. I guess we were probably using Lotus 123. But it showed me the importance of financial modeling. Mm-hmm. And so we have some really deliberate rules about how we model stuff and how we show variables, reflect variables, et cetera. And we try to create models that have multiple applications, so that the variables aren't built into the model. There's a separate page where all the variables are, and you can tweak the variables, and it runs through the whole model. Mm-hmm. So that was a big part of it, and I think also just understanding, since we were selling a lot of assets, understanding how the sale process worked, which is pretty mechanical at this point, but at the time when you're a kid, which I pretty much was, it was every day it was learning a lot with different personalities and et cetera. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was fun, and it was really worthwhile. It really helped me become adept at quantitative modeling.
Did you know from there that you wanted to go start doing your own deals? Like you kind of started to understand the behind the scenes, the back end part of it, like putting those deals together financially. Like, I can do my own thing now.
I wasn't quite there yet. So what I realized was that I worked for a bank, worked for a savings and loan called United Savings of Texas, which in the end of, I guess it was December of perhaps 88, I guess, or 89, the federal government came in and said that they were going to shut down. They created something called the Southwest Plan, whereby investors could come in and buy the institution, and they were guaranteed, to my recollection, so I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is how it worked. They were guaranteed a return on the assets from the federal government. So it was, and the incentive, the government incented the acquirer to dispose of the assets because the guaranteed return would drop like 1% or so every year. So if you sold so there was an incentive to sell, and I just it was a great place to be. But what they also did was, if the asset wasn't yielding, say, the 8% that it was supposed to in that year, the government was going to step in and make up the delta, so that the investor was guaranteed their 8% return for that year. And so at that point I realized, and the guy who bought the institution, United Savings of Texas, was a really unique guy. He was a guy named Lou Ranieri, and he's famous. There was a book called Liar's Poker. Oh, yeah. That was basically about him and his rise from the mailroom, I believe, at Salomon Brothers to become chairman of Salomon Brothers. And he was a really dynamic, interesting guy, really New York kind of guy. He was an interesting guy to work with. I didn't work with him that much, but I had several interactions with him. He said he was the board where he ran the board meeting where I was presenting stuff, et cetera. And anyways, when I realized that the government was making up the delta on every single deal, it was like, what am I doing here? I'm like, nobody cares if I can sell this asset for $100,000 more or $100,000 less, because he was going to get what he was going to get. He didn't care whether it came from my efforts or from the federal government making up the delta. And to be clear, when I say mine, there was probably 5 or 6 of us, but we worked together. And anyways, I had that realization, and I left and wound up going to work for a well-known developer in Houston, who was a pretty entrepreneurial, creative guy. And I stayed there for like 2 or 3 years, and then he had some legacy assets that caused he had some great assets, but he also had there were some issues, and I left and started my own company I said, hey, we were working on this deal. Since you're not going to do it, can I take it with me and do it? Mm-hmm. And so that was the first deal I did.
What was that? Tell us about that first deal.
It was we hadn't even really gotten into it. It was 2 abandoned apartment complexes in Southwest Houston, in Meyerland, basically, which was sort of a Jewish neighborhood. It's a Jewish neighborhood. And they were abandoned, and they were older projects from the 60s or probably late 60s, early 70s. And they were infill. Well, it was pretty dense right there. And I bought them with a partner who was a great investor. It was, took a chance on me, and it was a great deal, a great opportunity for us. And we wound up demolishing the apartments, filling in swimming pools, which is important to do. You have to take out the concrete. You can't just pour dirt in it. And reconfiguring the streets. So we wound up with 33 single-family home sites. And we sold the lots to builders, and it was a good project. It took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to, but it was fundamentally good real estate. And I drive through occasionally, and all the homes are still standing and look great. And it was that was the first project.
How old were you when you did that?
30.
Okay.
I think maybe 30, 31. I think that was my first project.
Where did the confidence come to be able to step into something? That sounds like a pretty big first deal.
It was. It was. I mean, it's just, you can sort of, a big first deal was just a multiple. It wasn't more complicated. It was just more, plus I had great consultants who helped with the city process of abandoning the street. And it was just a slightly larger version of a smaller deal. So it wasn't like, it was a pretty linear scale. Mm-hmm. my partners, who were largely passive, but were in real estate, doing other stuff and car dealerships. And so they gave, they trusted me, but they were also, they were good guys to bounce ideas off of. No, that's the end of it. It worked out to be a good project. It took longer than we thought, but most real estate deals do take longer than people think.
It sounds like, the way that you explain the trajectory of your pathway, it seemed like you learned at an early age strategy, mechanics, and discipline, because you were in spreadsheets or Lotus and you were understanding how deals work financially or structurally, which seems like the right way to do it. Then you learn how to potentially not get over your skis, so to speak. Yeah. And I guess my question has there been a moment in your time where you thought, whoa, this is too much. I'm not sure if I can handle it. I'm in trouble in this section or the other. And
I would say there are moments where, at the end of the day, no matter how smart we think we are, there are so many exogenous factors, like most notably the economy. Yeah. And, the biggest project I'd done, well, except for this East Downtown stuff, was in 2000, when did the world, ended in 2008, right? Mm-hmm. And in October of 2008, I always jokingly say that I was under contract to purchase 16 acres in West Houston on corners of southeast and southwest corners of Greenhouse and I-10. And Texas Children's and Methodist had announced that they were going to open across the freeway, and it was going to be called Texas Medical Center West. And I thought, well, man, this is perfect. And we can do medical office. It's going to be a great campus. We're going to build medical office buildings there. And the guy who is still the president of Texas Children's was a guy named Mark Wallace, and he said that the intersection, which was of Barker Cypress and I-10, which was perhaps a quarter mile east of ours, and so it was basically the east end of what we're calling Texas Medical Center West, would be, if not the physical center of Houston, would be the momentum center of Houston within 10 years. And I'm like, oh, come on. What marketing hyperbole. When I bought that, that was, so all those things made me think that we should buy it. And the other thing was that at the corner of the Grand Parkway and I-10, Halliburton was going to build a 6 million square foot campus. Mm. But other than that, we were basically like the last stop on the bus line. Katie hadn't really taken off yet, et cetera. But I just felt like all those factors were working in our favor. And we closed like October of 2008. And several big financial institutions had gone down, and it was daunting. It was daunting. And the anecdote I've shared with people, told it this way, is that as a conductor was putting down his pen to stop the music, I was at the title company picking up a pen to sign the biggest deal we'd ever done. Yeah. And it worked out. We wound up sitting. I thought, okay, well, medical is not going to be impacted by this, but it really was, because doctors were scared what was happening in 2008, and a lot of doctors were selling their practices to bigger chains or bigger practices, merging with larger practices, and they were nervous about what the economy was going to do. So I wound up sitting there for like 3 years, just throwing stuff against the wall, hoping something would stick. And we had an incredibly patient lender who helped us with the project. He wound up, back in the time, they took what was called TARP funds, technical assistance recovery. I don't know what it stood for, but it was basically federal funds, and that they were giving to institutions. And this bank could have at any moment made a deemed insecure claim on our stuff and forced us to pay them off. Mm-hmm. and they didn't, even though they took TARP funds. So I was really, to this day, incredibly grateful to the bank, which has had like 4 different names since then and barely recognizable, but in particular to the loan officer that I dealt with. And I was loyal to him for all the deals we've done in that project subsequently, just because they were so great to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you ended up doing a retail project on that, huh?
Yeah, we wound up doing a retail. We wound up building 5 retail buildings, a Chick-fil-A, and then we partnered with another group and built a 200,000 square foot office building that was leased up and sold. It wound up being a great project. It wound up being a really great project. And the theory was, you're getting me going off on tangents, but the theory was that by building, so in this project, we had a lot of restaurants. We had Torchy's, Corner Bakery, Starbucks, Potbelly, Smash Burger, Asian restaurants, and several others, a couple others, I think, from the beginning. And I thought that was really great because aside from just becoming like arguably the dining destination in the energy corridor, I thought that when energy companies were looking for employees, and they sort of derisively say that young people, they want quality of life, not just quantity of life. So they want to have a Starbucks on campus. So I think, okay, that's going to do well in good times. And in bad times, when landlords are chasing, 5 landlords are chasing the same deal, and it's just a question of who's going to drop their prices, their rent, and it's a race to the bottom. I thought, well, we have a qualitative edge because we've got this campus and all these restaurants. So the landlord of that office building wouldn't necessarily have to just keep engaged in this race to the bottom on rental rate to the point where it became unsustainable, but they were doing the deal just to get people in. So I think it worked out well. We signed a big lease with an engineering company called AECOM, which is an international engineering construction company, and some other tenants. And there were some vacancies. We've long since sold the building, and the building, the group that we sold it to, I think is closing like this week, coincidentally.
Oh, wow.
And, but it worked out well, and I don't remember where I was going with it, but anyways, it turned out to be a good project for everybody.
You ended up meeting a real young, dynamic construction guy, I think, through that project as well.
It's true. It's true. I was like, wait, who's that? Who's the young guy? No, you're right. We met because of Torchy's.
Because of that.
And I still remember the Torchy's, like the opening night when the Torchy's hot rod van showed up and was throwing coupons or T-shirts out and mugs out to all the people. That was quite a scene with the Torchy's grand openings.
Is that the one that we did in Katy? With the steel on the top? I can't remember either.
Steel on top?
Well, it had this undulating interior-wise. It had this white steel.
That was Sugarland.
Oh, it's Sugarland.
The one that we had like I think a bronze brush finish, like structure, boxy kind of thing that was hung from the ceiling.
Yeah, it probably wasn't us.
Yeah. I used to remember all those. I'm losing my touch now because I can't remember all those deals now.
How many did you do?
Well, the first one I did was on Shepherd. That one on Shepherd.
Still exists.
That was store number 5, I think. And then when I left, we had just designed store 90, maybe 89, 90, something like that. And then we'd constructed probably 80 something.
I still remember taking my wife and my kids to that store on Shepherd for the first time. It's like, try this. Get this one that says trailer park trash. I think that's probably going to be a good one. Yeah. It just sounds, the irreverence of it was like so different than what I had done before.
Yeah, that was one of those deals when we learned about Torchy's, or I first got introduced. I was like, man, I just had this, intuitive, like I got to become part of that. Like I got to build for those guys. I got to, and then the story beyond that was pretty interesting. But, and for me that, one of the biggest things out of that was I gained a pretty important best friend and a mentor. I wanted to ask you about mentors and like how has that played a part in your journey?
Man,
have you had some?
I've had the most amazing mentor. My father-in-law was a real estate guy in Houston, and when I left and went out on my own, he said, "Well, you can." He was an old school real estate guy. He's still alive. He's still doing great. He's 92. And until a year or so ago, he was playing tennis. But he was an old school guy. He had built apartments. He had built retail centers. He had built industrial parks. It was before people specialized. He built one of the first car washes in Houston. And he's just a great guy. And so he said, "You can office with me," which was great because I kept my costs down. And we officed together. That was probably for 30 years. And, after a while, my business grew and he got, his business lessened, but he still liked going into an office. So he officed after a while. Instead of me officing with him, he was officing with me and did so until probably a year ago. And it's just like, I couldn't ask for a better father-in-law, much less a better mentor. And he's just one of those guys that's like universally respected in our industry, and my colleagues who know him, love him. He's just a great guy. And so he was tremendous institutional knowledge and just wisdom and integrity. And I know he's going to watch this, so I mean it.
Well, what's something that you learned that you took away from, like, what's something that stands out that you're like, man, that piece of knowledge, that quote, that piece of advice really.
I think integrity, and although you don't want to think you have to learn integrity, I like to think that it's intuitive, but also. Just how you deal with tenants and keeping in mind an eye on the larger picture. And, sometimes you may not get you may not win every battle in a lease, but if you think about the bigger picture and you temper your desire to win that particular point by the likelihood that it's really ever going to become an issue, sometimes it's easier to sort of think about the relative importance of that point, of that issue.
When I met you, I came to Houston. You gave me a quick tour around Houston, and then you took me to one of your developments here close. I remember walking into was it a Thai or a Vietnamese? And I remember you being so gracious to those tenants and just asking them how they were and making sure they were fine, and just the common chit chat, but it was really sincere.
It is, and I like the tenants. Our success is their success, and their success is our success. And this sounds so patronizing, I suppose, and but I really believe that it's a partnership. It really is a partnership, and obviously there are times when the leverage shifts, but it's a partnership, and we have to be mindful of that. And their success is our success, as I said.
Were in your career, did you ever find yourself in an environment that didn't have that philosophy, or is that something that you innately just carried?
No, I've had employees, I've had partners. The downside of being such close friends is sometimes it's hard to sort of say no or to give the hard response. And so sometimes I've had partners on projects who didn't necessarily ascribe to what my perspective. And frankly, in a way, that was like it was a good thing because because I'm sure, whether I think I'm a great guy and I'm an empathetic guy, sometimes maybe I go overboard. And sometimes my partner would go overboard in terms of, enforcing the law or whatever, enforcing the lease. So I think that there's moderation as with most things is important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good cop, bad cop.
Yeah, it's not, you don't really consciously play that game, but I think intuitively you're doing that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think what strikes me is not necessarily you have to be their best friends, because it is business, and we have good conversations, we have tough conversations. You have to have both of them, but it's the sincerity of the moment, right? You can do that on both sides.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that there's you like to think that there's a willing partner on the other side of the transaction, but maybe they're not as sincere at times, and maybe they view it as just a business transaction. And to be clear, it's a business transaction. We don't view it otherwise. Right. But sometimes I had one tenant who was a charming guy when we signed the lease, and then afterwards he just was like screaming at us all the time. And I knew his lawyer was a good friend of ours. I called him up and said, hey, this guy's he's just on our butt constantly for stuff that's beyond our control. And what should I do? And he said, well, take him out to lunch. He's a good guy, take him out to lunch and just see if you can talk. I called him up, and a well-known guy, and I said, hey, could we just grab a bite? We had a great conversation before. He goes, I don't have time for my family, much less time to have lunch with you. I said, okay. But at least, it was not the response I was thinking, but then I knew where we stood, and I could sort of recalibrate my expectations and how we interacted.
Yeah. Do you foresee anything dramatically changing in our industry? Do you see there being a pivot? Do you see?
Well, there's sort of a pithy expression I like to think that the only thing constant is change, right? So I think things are always changing. There are some things that are evolutionary, and there are some things that are revolutionary. Yeah. I think the most fundamental is the internet, and that's probably, you can argue that it was revolution in the beginning, and it's continuing to be evolutionary at this point. It's still a lot of changes. People's shopping patterns differ, and so I think the internet is the good. I mean the thing of our times that changes the course of humankind. Probably more so than it changes our little shopping centers here and there. So. That's obviously a big factor, and it affects retailing, as retailers have to adapt to a new reality where you're not just the corner store. You're not competing against the guy around the corner. You're competing against people all over the world, and sometimes there are some things that people want the experience for, and other things people just want the least expensive, fastest vendor.
Yeah. I was thinking about something that you were saying last night whenever we were touring around is when you think about the evolution of the big malls, the big building, multiple retailers, big box retailers, and all of that is shoved into a big shell, more or less, and you have everything is artificial. And the downfall of those, and they're not so advantageous these days, and they're kind of getting displaced. But there's a rise of these outdoor malls that are more experiential, and that says something in a way that even though the interwebs that we can go on and purchase and get it now that are somewhat transactional, that remove the experience, even though that's there, people are still wanting this social interaction, this experience. And then if you associate that with what you're doing and what your belief is in terms of contextual, even though it's smaller or bigger, no matter the scale, there's a contextual value, a place where people can connect and see one another and perhaps have this social engagement. If you're still infusing that in the smallest way, then that still seems to be of value moving forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense at any scale. Yeah. I mean, we were talking the other day about Farrell, founder of Torchy's, who, I mean, you told me that he had virtual reality goggles so he could walk through a space. And even though he was running the entire enterprise, he wanted to walk through the space. And I think, if I recall correctly, he had a particular interest in lighting. And I mean, that's pretty granular. Yeah. And it's all about creating that experience. And the experience is not just about getting the food. And even though it's, you can buy it, I suppose, online, even though we talked about frozen or not, but it's the whole ambiance that's created. And it's not just architecture, it's also attitudinal, even the way the fonts on the menu. And the names of the names of the particular tacos. It's just all part of the sort of the brand DNA. And I know it's talking more about a particular retailer than a center per se, or a larger project. No, but
yeah, I think that's that attitude, or that getting granular in a way it transcends, right? It's just about the quality of environment that you're trying to produce in a way.
Yeah, all the details matter. Yeah, and they all add up to an experience. No matter if you're talking about a shopping center, how you're parking, how do you access it? What does the signage look like? What is it? Like we drove through that center last night, and we commented on the lighting, because that felt really good to drive into that kind of closed-in courtyard area. Yeah. And it felt inviting, and you could tell that somebody meticulously planned that experience when you drove in there.
It looked like a place where you'd want to, where you could stroll. Yeah. You could window shop and stroll. And I think that's what people want to do, is be part of, whether they're just placing themselves in a contrived urban setting or a real urban setting. They like to window shop and stroll, and you can stop and get an ice cream along the way or something. It's Disney figured it out 50 years ago, 70 years, 60 years ago. Yeah. So it's fun. I don't think it's that much of it is stuff that we consciously do. I think we rely on architects to do a lot of that sort of placemaking, I guess, is what we're trying to talking about. Yeah.
What are you excited about now? Like, what are you looking forward to?
I mean, I think the East Downtown project is huge, and it's a really exciting opportunity. It's got a lot of challenges. Most fundamentally is to maintain the authenticity. Well, most fundamentally is to build it and lease it, but to do it in a way that the authenticity isn't lost. And I think that in Houston in particular, it's going to be particularly important to retain that. And I don't want to say celebrate it, because that sounds contrived, but to put a spotlight on it perhaps is a little bit more subtle, or put a light on it. And I think that it's particularly relevant in Houston because there's so little history. And yet the consumer is more sophisticated and savvy today because they can see shops and street scenes all over the world, and they can see they can see retail all over the world, and people crave experiences, and without getting too dystopian, I mean, people don't want, even though you can buy it cheaper online, at some point people, the physical sense of community seems to be fading for a lot of people and being replaced by a virtual community. So I think that whether they realize it consciously or not, the physical community, which is really what people like, and I think that's why that's why people love to go walk the streets of New York and be part of humanity, that huge, massive humanity. But even if we can do it in a more contrived, a more deliberate way in shopping centers here, it's and anywhere else, it's people like that. Sidewalk cafes, et cetera.
10 years from now, what are people going to say about that project? Or how are you going to?
What idiots! Those guys thought they could do that.
Done yet?
I know.
What does it look like 10 years from now? How are you thinking about that project now? Like
it's going to be hopefully it'll be executed in the manner that we anticipate it's going to be executed, and with the tenants that we think that we have had an interest in, with whom we're working. And I think it's going to be a great adjunct to the city, or a great, I won't say amenity, but an integral part of the Houston experience, because of its proximity to downtown, its accessibility from the three major freeways, interstate freeways, I-69, formerly US 59, I-10 and I-45. It's basically at that junction of those. And the three major universities in Houston, Rice, U of H, University of St. Thomas, are all proximate. The downtown office market it's adjacent to it. The convention center is adjacent to it. And notably, the Minute Maid Park, where the Astros play, Toyota Center, where the Rockets play, and Shell Energy Stadium, where the Dynamo plays, are all within a 3-block walk or a 4 or 5 block walk. So I think all those reasons it's going to be. And one other point, which is huge, is what's separating us from downtown right now is the elevated portion of 59, 45 or 59. I can't remember. I think it's 59. US 59, I-69. And the plan is to take down that elevated freeway and put it below grade, like Clive Warren Park in Dallas. Yeah. And so that will bring, and that's a project, it's a huge undertaking. It's called the North Houston Highway Improvement Project. And that's scheduled to be completed in 2036. It's a huge undertaking, no pun intended, undertaking, but it's going to start in the next, presumably start in the next 6 to 8 months, and it's going to make a much more seamless, much more user-friendly transition from downtown to our project. You won't have to walk beneath a big freeway, which is kind of intimidating and foreboding, particularly at night. And instead of having our project have the barrier of the elevated 10 lanes of concrete between us, that'll all be below grade. And instead we'll have this huge plaza, green space, which hasn't really been programmed yet, but I'm sure it's going to be nicely done. So I think that those are huge. Those will be great for our project, and it'll be great for the city. And the convention center, which had its back to us because it faced downtown, is going to be completely renovated so as to have a front face on both the east side of on the west side where it is now, and on the east side of the building. And in the meantime, the last thing is, there's Houston, I guess a FIFA World Cup is going to be in the United States, and there's going to be, I think, 8 or 9 games in Houston. And there's talk about making East Downtown the FIFA fan zone for 36 or so days, starting next year, or 2026, I guess. So that'll be great. That's a huge lift, but it'll be great for the city. It'll be great for us. Although interestingly, it comes with huge restrictions. Like I think all of the signs, I think tenant signs can stay, but I think that like just general advertising signs, unless you're a FIFA advertiser, have to be covered up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's still not a done deal that it would be in East Downtown, but it's I think the stakeholders. My understanding is the stakeholders want it to be in East Downtown, so that would be great for us too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's a lot going on. It's fun. I like what I do. Yeah. I really do like what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're still having fun.
Yeah. Most days.
Yeah.
When it's fun, it's really fun. When it's not, it's really not.
Yeah.
I know you guys like what you do.
Yeah.
Most days.
Most days.
Yeah.
I can't do anything else, so I'm kind of stuck.
I think I'm stubborn. I'm in this set, but I am real interested in improving, the profession, learning how to do that. I mean,
that's great.
As we all are.
I think I think you will succeed in doing that. But even if you don't succeed, just the mere fact that you're sort of bringing it to a conscious level, and other people are aware of that, then that unto itself is, helps to advance the ball, as they say.
Sure.
Well, this has been fun.
Thank you.
It's been great. Yeah, thank you very much.
People asking my opinion for an hour. It's
that was beautiful. Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
I'm glad you did it.